Talanoa is a word that is derived from the Samoan culture, which means having a conversation. This word can also be broken into two. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie, which brings us to Talanoa. Utopia Washington has created Talanoa as a platform to provide safe spaces for our queer and trans-Pacific Islanders to have a conversation, share their stories, and for community members to make a connection. While Talanoa is usually hosted in person, due to the pandemic, Utopia Washington has been able to utilize digital platforms to bring you Talanoa virtually. We are glad to have you here with us today. Welcome to our Talanoa.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's Talanoa, which we will be discussing the importance of creating and raising awareness around mental health. My name is Fania Sipili, and I am our Community Care Program Manager here at Utopia Washington. Before we start and we let our guests in, I just want to start off with a little bit of land acknowledgement. And I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish people, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, the original stewards of the land, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Um, I It's been a long time since being here facilitating our Talanoa, but this is something that's very important to me, and it really has to do with mental health. And as someone that's an advocate for mental health, I would just really, really love, and it's an honor to be able to introduce this person who will be joining us, Yungi O'Connell, who's a director at Men Seattle. So without further ado,
hello. Hi. Thank you so much, Fania. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation. I'm excited and delighted and honored to be able to connect with you and talk about all things mental health and answer any questions I can. As I've been in the field for over 7 years as a practicing mental health counselor. So yes, just very excited to engage in this much needed conversation.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you for always being, for always raising awareness for the work that we do. And I know it's through partnerships like yours, like ours, that's really allowed for Utopia Washington to kind of like seep into spaces that we haven't really touched before. So thank you. Also, if you don't mind, do you mind talking a little bit more about your role at Men Seattle, and also a little bit about Men Seattle, if you don't mind?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be honored to. So I am one of the directors at Mend Seattle. We also sometimes go by Mend Institute, depending on which face we are wearing. But basically, my route was that I graduated from Bastyr University up in Kenmore after making a pretty big change in my life, trying to just find my purpose and my calling. And I realized that being a therapist and a counselor and a healer was kind of what I wanted to do with my life. And so I attended that and graduated, became a licensed mental health counselor, had my private practice. I still have my private practice in Seattle, Capitol Hill, actually. And one of the opportunities I had was to be an intern at Men Seattle, back when it was known as Seattle Therapy Alliance. And since then, I came back as its program manager. And one of the passions that we have at MEND is to train the next generations of BIPOC and QT-BIPOC clinicians. So we are very much focused on, and it's part of our mission, to try to decenter and decolonize mental health care, recognizing its roots in the past, and trying to make it more accessible and inclusive for communities, particularly communities of color, LGBTQIA communities, and all the various intersecting identities that folks embody. So it's definitely been a passion and a mission that we have to try to make this work more accessible, less oppressive, and more liberatory. So.
Thank you. I'm such a huge fan of hearing of hearing like mental health warriors, if I can call, if I can call you that. I'm such a big fan of how everyone got into the work, right? And I know you mentioned increasing like BIPOC visibility in terms of having more BIPOC healthcare, mental health care providers. Something really interesting that that really touched base to me as you were speaking is decolonizing mental health. And before we get into the questions that we already have laid out, I really just want to ask, what does decolonizing mental health look like, and like what goes behind that process? Because
Yeah,
within Ethiopia, we do a lot of work that's trying to unlearn and unpack a lot of things, decolonizing mindsets, right? So I really want to learn more about that.
yeah, I really appreciate the question, and it's something that we're actively engaged in, because part of it involves finding all the places where maybe something either got internalized or socialized or accepted as the norm or the way or that kind of thing, especially as it relates to, trying to assimilate or trying to belong or feel a sense of belonging. And in particular, when we think about what maybe has gotten lost along the way. So, in the more traditional, conventional methods of therapy, it was, one-on-one. Sometimes you were looking at the therapist, sometimes you weren't. Sometimes they had their back to you, or they weren't even looking at you, and it was usually in this kind of room and all that stuff, and you were usually kind of pouring out and sharing whatever you may have experienced. It was usually fairly cognitive. So when I say cognitive, I mean there was a lot of talking, and it was a lot of
Mhm.
kind of um, uh, having that ability to actually talk through things, to be able to make sense of things, to analyze things, and all that stuff. And what we have kind of recognized as we have been doing our own work of decolonizing therapy is that, there are practices that have been practiced for generations, for thousands of years, in many cultures and communities that bring about healing and wellness. And it's kind of recognizing what those might be. For example, ancestral care or ancestral heritage workshops is one way to get in touch with lineage and the roots and get to be reconnected in some ways with community. As well as other aspects like movement and dance and song and play are also aspects of wellness and community and connection. And so these are kind of ways that we are trying to reimagine the way healing can be done, the way therapy can be like reprocessing of things, and a way of kind of like being who you are, which is also so fundamentally important, to feel like you can be your whole self, that you don't have to check any parts of you at the door, and that all of you are welcome.
Awesome. That was definitely a lot to digest. But that was a lot to digest. However, the one thing that really stuck out to me, and what it sounds like to me, is that kind of centralizing how you care about yourself, right? And speaking of finding internalized norms, I think this is a perfect segue to our first question. Um, so before we go any further, can we talk about the importance of raising mental health awareness in all communities of color? Um, I do know this is something that we currently are really trying to weave into the work that we do, coming from like very traditional backgrounds. A lot of our BIPOC communities are rooted in church, and like sometimes rooted in some traditional cultural practices that kind of really that does not acknowledge the importance of mental health. So I would really like to learn from you why it's important that we raise mental health awareness in all communities of color.
Yeah. Wow, I cannot overstate the importance of it, especially as somebody who walked my own journey so far of recognizing that I there were things going on that it was so helpful to have somebody acknowledge and help me get in touch with it and work through it, whether it be, the moments of depression or anxiety or for folks who may feel like there's something going on, but they're not sure what it is, I think it can be so helpful to raise awareness for understanding what some of the symptoms might be, to understand like ways you might be able to access care or help or wellness or support, that you don't have to be alone in it, that it's not necessarily something that like there's something wrong with you or that you're broken, but that you may need some help with understanding something or making sense of with something or processing something. Because so much of also what could potentially happen is, again, depending on how we're socialized or what we may experience in life, these things can be directly impactful about how we feel about ourselves, whether we feel acceptable, whether we feel a sense of belonging, and all of that can be contributing factors to feelings like feeling anxious, feeling anxiety, feeling compounding effects of all kinds of things. And so just to be able to get in touch with it can be really helpful.
I think, and it really brings me back to what you mentioned about how how wellness can look different ways, right? And you talked about movement earlier. You talked about movement and kind of just honing in on incorporating ancestral heritage and knowledge. And that's also something that we offer here at Utopia, which is one of the programs for our culture program, which is Alamai. And I feel like there is a wide array of ways that we can further take care of ourselves, right? Like if a happy body is a happy mind, I guess. But yeah, I really do appreciate that knowledge, because I feel like a lot of times folks are just kind of stumped. Like, is it normal for me to feel this way? Why am I feeling this way? Especially when someone else, like an elder, per se, would say, "Oh, those are all just like feelings," and then they associate it with like masculine toxicity and all sorts. And I feel like just seeking help mental health, regardless, is the most fundamental thing you can do for yourself. So I really,
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. What you just shared, in the sense of that has been part of what can contribute to an unwell feeling, which is that when we trace back what's happened in some of the more dominant cultures, especially ones that are more rooted in a Eurocentric ideology, a split between the mind and the body, and not kind of recognizing that they're all connected. Right. And so, that's so important as part of the healing work, is to reconnect, if you will. Like, yes, we do have bodies and we feel things and there's impact in ways. And that's been some of what I've been very heartened by in the more recent kind of movements and acknowledgments towards our nervous systems, our body regulation, all these kinds of ways that we start to understand differently that part of what can be so healing about community in and of itself is a kind of a co-regulation that happens when you're together. And that is very much a felt sense experience. And because of that, it doesn't always get the same kind of, what do you call it? It just doesn't get emphasized as much because it's not in this kind of mind cognitive preference.
I love that you mentioned co-regulations, because I really feel like that's where it's at. I know every time that I've been feeling a little bit unwell mentally, they always suggest, like, you should go just be active to get your endorphins running. And so that's really just kind of proof of what you just mentioned, that like the body and the mind are connected. Yeah. And so, I mean, the proof is in the pudding. So I just kind of wish that a lot of folks would just kind of, just be a little bit more open. And I do know, and not to say that a whole lot of people are not a little bit more aware of mental health, because I feel like ever since the pandemic, there's been a spike of like mental health, the importance of mental health, which is unfortunate that we had to go through a pandemic in order for us as people or as a race to recognize that.
Yeah.
But at least better late than never. That's what I say.
Yeah.
So, and since we're on the topic, since we're on the topic, can we talk about ways a person can access and seek out mental health resources? Because I feel like that's really something that is a bit lacking in marginalized communities and communities of color. Is that although we recognize that there's a need for mental health like therapy, but not a lot of people know how to get access to it. So if you
Yeah.
can touch base on how, folks can access those, that'll be amazing.
Yeah. That is just it's just such a big challenge, right? Where to begin? So I feel like already kind of, as we were mentioning, maybe you've got something that you're in touch with that says, oh, I'm not sure what these thoughts are, or I don't know what this feeling is, but it might be good to talk with somebody. Where do you find them? Where do you begin? And it can be quite a journey. One of the things that I believe in my personal and professional experience is that kind of what we were talking about with that co-regulation is it can be so important to have a good fit, a good connection with that therapist. And so that could take a little time, but I think going to resources is super helpful. So for example, like King County has a 211, I think, number that you can connect with, and they have a resource bank of providers. Of course, MEND Seattle is a potential resource. We have a referral network that's across the state. And then there's other really great organizations like Utopia, like Pride Foundation, other organizations such as, I think, Washington Therapy Fund, and Lotus Fund are also some organizations that have referral sources for BIPOC and QT BIPOC folks that are looking for care. Of course, there's also the avenue of if you were to maybe check in with a clinic or a provider in that sense, they usually have some connections with some folks to connect you with. I know that Utopia Washington has a clinic that is also very exciting to get some resources and connection there. There's of course online platforms as well. So Open Path Collective is one resources that I can think of. Psychology Today is a pretty big one. Therapy Den is another one. Just a lot of different potential avenues to try to find some care. It could depend on what you're looking for. So if representation matters for you in terms of who you might be sitting across from, if you were to maybe Google BIPOC therapists or QT BIPOC therapists, I believe that there are some networks out there that would pop up. I also feel like there might be some other ones that are escaping me at the moment. But anyway, those are some ideas that come to mind. Of course, the encouragement would be that you check out various websites, really just try to get a sense of who it is that you're kind of reading about, and see if there's the thing I like to encourage people to feel it. Like, do you feel like what you're reading is resonating for you? Because that's kind of a first indicator of this could be somebody I would want to work with and feel safe enough with.
Yeah, those were definitely. I'm gonna make sure we have our transcriber transcribe all of those out. So that
sorry,
way
there's a lot.
No. Don't apologize. Those are actually really good resources, and especially coming from someone that works, in the mental health portion of health. I'm just gonna make sure that they transcribe that so that way it can, we can have folks access that as well. I also wanted to really point out that it's okay that your first therapist doesn't work for you, because a lot of people have that mindset that like, oh, this is the therapist and Oh, and folks, I'm no mental health specialist. I'm just saying because I also had to like look for a therapist. I also had to seek mental health resources. And aside from what little I knew, I started to learn more about seeking mental health and seeking and kind of like your healthcare provider, right? Like the first doctor may not work for you. Okay, then you're gonna move on to someone that really sees you for what you are and for how you want to be perceived. And that's something that you mentioned, right? About representation, who you're talking to. So, folks, it's okay. You don't. Your first therapist can't be your. You won't be stuck with them forever. And I know you also mentioned to feel for something that resonates with you. And I think that's the most important thing that we can stress out to folks, right? Just feel it out and find care that works for you.
Yeah, that I really can't stress that enough in the sense of, and I absolutely echo you in the sense of, you know, for what you might be processing, what you might be experiencing, and what you might be kind of healing from or within, having somebody that you can really show up with, having somebody that really sees you and hears you and can hold you and support you is so important. And it would not necessarily be the case that you will always feel safe and like so comfortable. I mean, definitely there will be moments of maybe some discomfort or maybe some unease and maybe some things that will feel, hard in terms of emotions and things that you might be processing. But really, having that person that is with you on that journey, that helps you at least feel safe enough, and more importantly, I think someone where you don't have to check certain parts of yourself at the door, because especially some of those parts are really going to be important for you being your whole self. And definitely what Fania said around, like, if you don't feel that, that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you. It just may not be a good fit with the therapist that you're working with. So
Thank you. Um, you mentioned, I know we're going a little bit off script, but like I love having conversations around mental health because it's something that, when you're passionate about something, of course, you're going to want to dissect anything and everything. And I just wanted to ask, since you started, how much of an increase have there been around BIPOC folks that actually provide mental health, like therapy, in terms of therapy, or has there been like a huge amount of BIPOC representation in the mental health field, or?
yeah, thanks. The really, really great question. I feel I would like to say that there has been an increase. I feel like at least the communities that I'm engaged in and part of, and that we are at Mend, I think there's been some work that has been helpful to make it more accessible for folks, to make it more inclusive, and to make sure that people's identities don't have to get checked at the door. So I think the curriculum has gotten better. I think the representation has improved as well. I think students not having to do a lot of translating in the same way that I think it has been maybe problematic before. I think the other thing that we've noticed at Mend is that it's taken a little bit of time, but the conversation has been shifting to recognizing what we're talking about when we talk about things like racial trauma, when we talk about gender fluidity, or when we talk about intersecting identities, and that having an awareness of your various identities and how they intersect is directly impactful in how you might develop who you are, how you come to feel about yourself, or how welcome you feel. And so these are all parts of what helps a person feel well in their own body, in their own mind, in their own heart. And that's something that I think curriculum is coming along in that sense, to help really embrace that awareness and that knowledge. In particular, what you were talking about earlier about there are so many different avenues to healing and wellness, and it's not just talking. That's certainly one of them, and it's something that I learned on from the very beginning when I first started my journey. But since then, I have gotten to experience things like psychodrama, psychotherapy. I've gotten to experience other kind of healing movements, as well as singing and dance, and other more communal practices that help you feel engaged and connected, that are so important. And so things like in the more indigenous realm, like circles, and been very honored to be part of healing circles, can be some of those things. So these are all things that I feel like are starting to come more into the profession, as well as an understanding of interpersonal neurobiology, which is part of the science behind the co-regulation, which I kind of laughed recently when I heard, this has been a couple of years now, but apparently there was a book that was published about breath and breath work and breathing. And as somebody who's been a practitioner of different spiritual practices, including like meditation and breath, it was not a surprise that this would have been something that has been in service of many, many communities for thousands of years. And now that it has the science backing, it's definitely made, I think, been more in the mainstream. So
that's really good to know. And it sounds to me that like with, I guess the more progressive the years, I mean, we all become, right, in the way of thinking, in the way we navigate our lives, a little bit more open to ideas. It sounds to me that the increase of BIPOC providers and students even has allowed for like this intersectionality of being able to find how what way of healing works for us. I know you mentioned breathing, and it really just brought me back to one of these really good my past therapy sessions. I remember a good four count breathing exercise, and I feel like it's really worked with me. And so like every time like my head gets a little bit loud, I was told to like breathe in 4 seconds, hold it in 4 seconds, and exhale 4 seconds. So it's like 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, and that's really something that's really helped me. And I recognize and I realize that like even the simplest things of control, such as controlling our breathing, really helps with how we go about our days. So I'm really proud of everyone that has studied psychology, advocated for representation, but continue to move the work so that way all avenues can be available, for people like us and people like our communities.
Yeah.
We'll just move right along. This is funny because there was this question I've had. I remember you saw Joey earlier, and she did a great job facilitating the panel that we had on mental health. And we were having a conversation because at work we just seem to have all different types of conversation, and mental health being one of them. And she asked a question that really stuck me, and she said, "Does everyone have mental health problems, or why are some more severe than others?" So that's really something. I gave an answer. I told her that I don't know. I'm sure everyone has mental health problems to a certain degree. That really doesn't call for like therapy or mental health resources. But I really just wanted to know your take.
Was that your answer?
No, yeah, that was kind of my answer. I told her that like I don't know. Like, of course, everyone is suffering a certain a little anxiety here, feeling a little bit down there, but I don't know. There's a varying degree of when it could be considered a mental health problem. So
yeah. That's also a great question, and it kind of depends. So I will try to respond from my own kind of understanding based on what I've learned. And I'm sure if you were to ask this question to other therapists, they may have a slightly different answer. But I kind of see it in terms of how a system develops. So I feel like what happens is when we think of ourselves as these kind of whole organisms and structures or whole systems, and depending on what's happened to us over time as we develop, whether from infancy to adult or whatever age you might be, you may have experiences that could be impactful. So we can think about this in the realm of what may be referred to as developmental trauma, or also complex developmental trauma. So there has been a fair amount of research that explores looking at what is known as adverse childhood experiences. And depending on how you answer some of the questions on this kind of scaling assessment question, I think it's like 10 questions or something like that, actually is a pretty decent indicator of where you might fall in terms of mental wellness or mental, I hesitate to say mental illness, but yes, mental illness in the sense of, like, I see it kind of as a spectrum. So that could be an indicator of what may be different for somebody. And it's impactful in the sense of when you think about an organism growing. So in the way that you might think of like a flower or a plant growing, depending on how the soil is, the watering, the sun, the light, all of these things can directly impact what this plant will become. Will it be big, small, wide, whatever? How will it flower? What will the colors of it be? All that kind of stuff. And I think of us in a similar way around, how our system is cultivated or developed. And so some of this can directly impact things in terms of like brain wiring, neurotransmitters, basically the chemicals in the body can be affected, as well as this is more in kind of the realm that I've been in the last few years, which is our nervous system. So if we think of our nervous system as also part of the system that develops, there are things that can happen that kind of interrupt the development of the nervous system. So that could also look a little different than in terms of what somebody's experiencing. And I've heard it said different ways, that there is something that's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's DSM for short, acronym. And basically it's about a 700-page book that lists out all of the mental disorders that have been determined by a massive psychological board. And the criteria here is, as you can imagine, very vast for what those various disorders are. Usually when they talk about this in a more clinical realm, they're talking about this in the sense of how is the functioning? So how is a person functioning? And where it starts to veer into what's more considered a disorder would be when the functioning is impaired to a degree that something isn't doable. So if that's difficulty going to work, if that's difficulty sleeping, if that's difficulty having physical intimacy, things like that. And then there's other things that can happen in terms of it may not necessarily rise to a level of what might be a disorder, if you will, but there could be episodes of experiences. So whether they be something like having some symptoms of a panic, or feeling really anxious, having a lot of thoughts that you can't stop, maybe even intrusive thoughts, maybe feeling down and low, or, just like you can't get off the couch. These would all be kind of symptoms, if you will, of some possible things that could be going on for you in your system that could be potentially treated with psychotherapy. So that would be talking to somebody, talking to a therapist. It could also be something that could be in the realm of a chemical thing. So, that's the whole kind of serotonin, SSRIs, benzodiazepines. And then also, of course, want to acknowledge the medicinal resources that are and have always been part of indigenous practices. So ayahuasca, psilocybin, mushrooms, those kinds of things that are also ways that people can access care and wellness and help to start to change maybe some of the things that have happened to them developmentally. Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question, but
No, you're good. You're good. I'm like taking it all in. I couldn't help but think about a biology term that I couldn't help but liken it to like a stimuli and like a plant, like right, it has to do with an environment. And I think that really resonated with me in terms of your childhood and the environment that you're around kind of dictates like whether mental wellness or mental not wellness. So yeah, that's very
yeah. And there's also of course a lot of literature on intergenerational trauma, on trauma that is in some ways kind of not past, but it can actually be kind of coded in some ways. And so that's another piece of this as well, is there's a lot of evidence that might suggest that it not that it's in your DNA and that it's with you and that's it. I don't mean to suggest that, but for sure that what our ancestors might have experienced could pass through in some ways, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense. And as as islanders, we are no strangers to intergenerational trauma, which is funny that you mentioned that because, we've been having conversations since our last cutie pie retreat. We've been having conversations around we've been having intergenerational conversation about trauma and how we could come together as a community in order to kind of unlearn a lot of trauma that's been that's been continued on in a cycle that's not really healthy. So
yeah, I'm so heartened to hear that those conversations are happening.
Yeah, and it also stems from decolonizing a lot of practices and a lot of conversations that we're so used to. It's unfortunate that it's like centuries and centuries of it's just centuries and centuries of trauma.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate for some communities as well that they're still dealing with it and still trying to unlearn, us being one of them as well. But you can only hope to look into the future and move on. So
yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead and have a little breather here. I feel like we've been talking and I feel like we just need to breathe for a little bit. So stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. Yeah. And we'll continue on this conversation.
Aloha. Talanoa.
Pulaminaka.
Hapane. Hello, and welcome to Utopia.
Since 2009, Utopia has worked with queer and trans-Pacific Islander leaders to create a safe, welcoming, supportive, and vibrant space for members of our community to address basic needs, build pathways towards new expanding career and life opportunities.
Our mission here at Utopia is to provide sacred spaces to strengthen the minds and bodies of queer and trans-Pacific Islanders through community organizing, community care, civic engagement, and cultural stewardship.
Our vision is to create a world of cultural wealth, dignity, healing, and liberation for cutie pies that honors our ancestors and support future generations and ourselves.
One of our values here at Utopia is dignity. We believe in the importance and worth of every person in society. We aim to assist in building that leadership. We believe that everyone is worthy of honor and respect.
Afio Maya. Our doors and arms are always open for you. For more information, you can visit our website at www.utopiawa.org. Thank you, and we hope to see you soon.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. We were just having a conversation about conversations about how a lot of people like teeter-tottering between what factors define who who gets to live their life in the mental wellness aspects and who doesn't. And so it's been a very interesting conversation. So if you're interested, you can rewind and catch up on that. But moving forward, I have another question, if you don't mind.
Please.
So one of these questions is, what is the best advice to give people who are around those that have shown signs of needing mental health support? And I feel like this is a very important question because oftentimes I know we are around people that often say that show signs of depression or anxiety. So just a general answer of something that we can do without trying to. I know during our mental health training we're told not to we're told not to. There's a word for it. We're told not to try to dissect what they're going through, but kind of just be there for them. So
yeah, I think that that's a tough one because it can be so hard to watch a loved one in pain or suffering or struggling, and sometimes it can feel so hard to not know what to do, how to respond, like how to get care, how to maybe get them connected to something. And it can be so hard, it really kind of can go the spectrum around, like if it's a matter of kind of just listening to somebody and kind of hearing what they're going through in a way that doesn't necessarily pathologize or make somebody feel like there's something wrong with them. In some ways, it can just be helpful to have somebody to connect with and actually feel like you're not alone. It can be really, really helpful to know that you're not just struggling with this by yourself. For sure, if there's a way to get somebody connected to care or to services, whether it's one of the things I mentioned before or doing something like calling a chat line or one of the, depending on what the concern is. Of course, there's a number of different suicide hotlines, and I believe there's like the Trans Lifeline as well. So, these are certainly some resources that you could maybe direct somebody to as possible ways to get them connected to care. If you wanted to take them to a clinic or someplace nearby to access those cares, that's something else that is possible as well. Just to be with them, maybe when they're making a call or when they go someplace, or even to get some help to have some maybe emotional support to search together for a therapist or for a clinic that they might want to check out. That could also be potentially helpful. Mostly just trying to not make somebody feel worse for what they're going through, to actually feel like they are not alone.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good advice. That's sound advice. And the word I was looking for was diagnose. The word I was looking for was diagnose. So another question is, how do you feel about emotional support animals?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I will say I appreciate you finding that word. It's kind of interesting that you say that because I know myself and most of my colleagues, when we were in our training, I will only speak for myself that I probably diagnosed myself with 5 to 8 different mental disorders.
Same.
I just would be like looking through the DSM going, oh, wow, I think that might be me. I'm not sure. And that I know that is something that, I think can be really helpful in terms of the information that's out there, in terms of if you Google like what some of your symptoms are, that may be helpful to give you some language to then be able to communicate with a provider, with a loved one, to be able to put some words to what you might be experiencing can be helpful. I will want to just add that diagnosis is hopefully not meant to pathologize you. And when I say pathologize, I mean that you're not the problem. I really try to emphasize that with clients, that you're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You're experiencing something, and we're going to work together to figure out how to help you heal and transform what you're experiencing so that you can feel well, so that you can feel whole. So that's usually how I try to kind of think about in language diagnosing. Is it's not meant to be a label. It's really meant to try to have an understanding of what we're talking about as it relates to symptoms. So, sorry, I think there was a question that I may have missed.
No, but no, I was asking how you feel about emotional.
Yes, emotional support animals. Thank you. I get off track sometimes when I start talking. Emotional support animals are resources that I would have to say it kind of depends, because as it relates to comfort and connection, I have some thoughts around recognizing that when there's been some social misattunement, let's say, or social things that make it difficult for people to feel like they connect with other human beings or just feel safe. I think sometimes our furry kin and companions can be those sources of connection, community, support, and actually regulation. Similar to what we were talking about with co-regulation, that can be something that's experienced with animals. And so the idea that an animal could be an emotional support for you, I fully support. And that is something that is just part of the care that therapists can offer to clients, is to help them navigate those decisions, to think about whether that makes sense for them to have an emotional support animal, as well as if that's something that somebody is wanting to have, to do some support around writing a letter in support of it, so that they can get housing, so that they can have an emotional support animal with them, or in travel, or in places that they might visit. So
that's really good information to have, and also a really good resource to have, because I know a lot of members in our LGBTQ community, a lot of them, I think the word you used was misattunement. Am I right? Was that the word
yes.
you used? And I think a lot of them have a lot of disconnect from society, and just based on, and not, I'm sure, also people of color, right? Just being done with society. And I think having an emotional support for comfort, as you mentioned, is also a very important thing. I know some folks that have support animals, and they're just fine with themselves. And so, who am I to say, and who am I to coax people out of their house to come play when they're okay with their support animal? Because same. Sometimes dealing with the world and dealing with people is a lot of work.
Yeah, and there can be a lot that has given somebody the sense that it's not safe, that people aren't safe, that the world isn't safe. And I will say, in my own journey, to just speak a little bit more personally, one of my strongest attachments has been with a dog. I would describe them as one of my soul dogs. And I just really connected with this being. And I definitely think that's something that, I think that any around like attachment, that it's another being. And there certainly sure is, some thoughts around, animals and that kind of stuff. But I am one of those people that fully believe that these are really just wonderfully soulful creatures that have a lot of connection, and to feel that with another being can be really powerful and transformative, especially if there's been misses with other human beings.
Yeah, I second the idea, and I love that because I also have like fur babies at home, and I can't imagine them not being in my life, right? So kudos to fur babies around, and if you have a fur baby and you're watching them, feel free to give them a little hug and a kiss for the both of us. There was something that I really wanted to talk about, and I wanted to ask if Men Institute or another organization that you partnered with, if they offer mental health training, and just kind of like navigating how to speak to people, because I know there are mental health training that are done online, but it's pretty much just like one module here, another module there. And with working with folks that are a little bit more hands-on, I just kind of wanted to gauge and see if this was an option.
Yeah. Can I ask just a quick follow-up question there in terms of the training or the education that you might be imagining for that? Would that be just for kind of like public education?
Public education, but also because at Utopia Washington we do have case management, and case management we called it lovingly care management. So it's just so that way we can be able to kind of really connect with community members that call in and seek help. So that's kind of why I was asking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are always honored to partner with communities and organizations, and offer whatever we can in terms of education, whether it be psychoeducation or a little bit more in the clinical realm. One of the really the things that we're quite passionate about is trying to get the word out about therapy, about ways that therapy could be utilized for folks, especially underserved and underrepresented communities, and to basically try to lower the stigma around mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, to try to make it a little bit more accessible, and to offer it in a way that it doesn't seem so strange, I guess. I mean, I think that sometimes the miss can be to speak in a really clinical way. And even though I've, for example, like in this conversation, I've kind of dropped some more clinical terms, really it's about trying to make sure that folks can see themselves in the work and feel like, oh, this is for me. And so being able to offer any ways to language or communicate or to make it accessible is definitely something that we strive to do at MEND.
And I just want to add on that, like, although the clinical words have been dropped, there's a difference between like intention, right? Like the intention, because some people can drop clinical words and totally want to make it seem as if, I guess they're diagnosing or like just really just trying to put a word to where it's at. But like, I feel good intention, and there's there's good intent behind words, and they're not really, I feel no kind of negativity at all from it as well. So
yes, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. I think it's so important to be talking about mental health. I I think it is part of our lives to get in touch with ourselves and to know how we're doing, and I think sometimes that can be challenging if it's something you've been living with for a while. I know sometimes the symptoms that end up showing up, they actually were originally survival skills, coping mechanisms, right? Like disassociation is it can actually be a very powerful survival skill. And then at some point, what can sometimes happen is those things that we used to survive may no longer be serving us. And so then trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I move differently? How do I not think differently, but kind of something like that in terms of maybe letting some of the pathways experience something different, including what can sometimes be a real challenge, which is it safe? Is there, what would be the discerning around boundaries and about like what your system is telling you that could indicate that how to shift that at all? If what you've experienced in childhood is it's not safe, sometimes that can be a real difficult thing to shift into a feeling of safety.
Yeah, I think that was a very powerful sentiment and statement regarding survival skills, right? We do people undiagnosed or people that haven't really are aware that they have mental health issues. Um, I don't think they understand that like they're going about their day surviving, and I think the more it goes untreated, the closer the circle begins to kind of close in on you. And I think that's why it's very important. It's very important to try just to be conscious of mental health, and that to want to get it, the need to get it. So thank you so much for this conversation. I know if it was left up to our own devices, we'll probably have 2 hours worth of conversations. But I just really want to circle back and thank you for just just for this conversation and the importance of having talk about the importance of raising awareness, because I lost a lot of folks I lost a lot of folks due to um, their battles with mental health, and so that's why it's also another reason why I'm a huge advocate for it.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and also just so honored to share all I can in this profession to help to raise awareness and to let people feel like therapy could be for them. I am one of those folks that believes that everyone could have a therapist, and hopefully that would help. It's just something that I wish was less stigmatized. I've heard in other countries, for example, like Argentina, it's pretty common for everybody to just have therapists. I don't know if that's part of anything around the healthcare system as part of that, but I for one, feel like everyone could benefit from a therapist. So, yeah.
If it is Argentina, I see you. And also, like, just going back about like the lack of healthcare access, which also equals to like lack of mental health access, and that's just something that's been quite alarming in a lot of communities. I feel like the more marginalized you are, the harder it is to have access to just health resources in general, which also includes mental health. And that's why a lot of organizations are on the ground, fighting, advocating for bills to try to have it more available, readily available for community.
Yeah.
But since we're nearing our time, I just want to thank you again, Youngie, for being able to be here with us. We might just have a part three, just talking about mental health, and I would love to have you back. Um, if you have any last things that you want to say, any book recommendations.
Oh my gosh, don't get me started on the book recommendations. I could probably give you a library and then you'd have to transcribe that.
Give me a list. Send me a list.
No, I just mostly just want to make myself as available and we at Mend as available as we can to answer any questions we can. We have a really incredible intake coordinator, Erin Arney, who is also a naturopath and so has lots of experience, and people are just always welcome to call, to email, and just ask questions. We also have a kind of a brief FAQ on our website, but really just want to be available for anybody who has questions. And I would be delighted and honored and look forward to a part 3.
Definitely. No, you. I know we're always communicating via email, and I do know that on November 17, we'll be having an Ecosystems of Care for our Trans Awareness Week. We will be having HIV and STI testing, COVID and MPV vaccinations, hepatitis A, B, and C testing and vaccination as well. And we will also be having mental health consultations with Men Institute, and you'll be able to see Youngie and her team yourself. So if you have nothing to do, look on our website and you'll get more information. But until then, good night, stay warm, and goodbye, Seattle or Washington.